Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for attending the second in our Legacy Giving at Lunch Autumn Discussion Series presented by Leave a Legacy Minnesota, a program of Minnesota Gift Planning Association. We're proud to offer you this forum to ask questions and exchange ideas with your colleagues across the state. We'd like to thank the Initiative Foundation, Northland Foundation, Northwest Minnesota Foundation, Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation, Southwest Initiative Foundation, and West Central Initiative Foundation for supporting this Legacy Giving at Lunch series. Before I introduce you to our guest experts today, I wanted to go over a few important items. We will be encouraging questions throughout our time today. You have access to a Q&A box on your screen to share questions and a chat box to share comments. At the conclusion of the presentation, our presenters will answer any unanswered questions that are submitted, but again, we'll plan to address them throughout the conversation as well. If you're having any technical difficulties, please send a private chat message to the host, Legacy Giving at Lunch. In today's session, Friend or Foe, the fundraiser and the financial planner, we'll learn about the basic building blocks to creating a simple, mission-driven plan giving program for your nonprofit and the key drivers of the financial planning profession that will help improve your current program. Our speakers today are Sarah Steger and Ashley Reiter. Sarah is a co-founder of Steiger, Vitelli and Associates, LLC. Her firm counsels, coaches, and challenges mission-centered leaders in order to build individual, organizational, and sector capacity in leadership, planning, fundraising, and communications, and to embed more racially equitable and inclusive practices in the work. Sarah's 17 years as a fundraiser and her love of building power through organized people and organized money allows her to help organizations get clear on what it takes to achieve their mission. Ashley is a financial planner and advisor for families, businesses, and nonprofits. She has been helping people make an impact in their lives and in their communities for more than a decade. Ashley's goal for her clients is that they have a healthy relationship with their money, whatever that may look like for them. She is a certified financial planner, an accredited investment fiduciary, a chartered retirement planning counselor, and has a master's degree in financial planning. Thank you for joining us today, Sarah and Ashley. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. We're glad to be here. I see people kind of trickling in here in the participants, just underlining feel free to use the chat. We love to have that interaction. So here we are, Ashley.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi, it's just us talking to each other until the people speak to us. So hopefully they will.
Good. Yes, good with me.
I'll share my screen here and we can jump in. I know you're going to hear my dog. You might hear blue jays because they're loud. Kids. It's just where we're at right now. All right, hopefully maybe hosts can let me know if there's any issue with the screen. Hopefully you're seeing just my web browser here with our little slide deck in it. And hopefully you can still see us and hear us. So I don't think I can still see the chat, but I think Allison and Amanda can let us know. So we'll jump in. So Ashley, you want to say anything more about yourself before we kind of move ahead?
No, I think Allison covered it. So like she said, I'm a financial planner. I've been in the profession for a little over 12 years, and it's my dream job. I love helping people with their money. Money is complex, it's emotional, it's very personal, it can be scary, it can be a lot of things. And so that's where I love to play the role of advocate and counselor, sometimes with clients and as it relates to their charitable giving.
Awesome. And same for me. I agree. Money is complex, but it also has a lot of power to change the world for the better. So that's kind of where Ashley and I come together. Full disclosure and a little bit of a spoiler alert for our session. We actually are friends. So that's the big spoiler. We have spent years actually talking about how our professions intersect. And so this is fun for us to get to talk about it with you all today. So we'll get right into it. We've got some kind of questions, a little bit provocative, I think, kind of questions we might wonder about one another's profession if we weren't friends and hadn't talked about some of these things. So we're trying to kind of guess what you might like to know as fundraisers and people working in this area of mission work. And if you have other questions you wish we would have asked each other, kind of candid questions, put them in the chat, and there's a pretty good chunk of time at the end for Q&A with you all. So first, Ashley, what do people, when you're working with your clients, and I would call them the donor, what do they most deeply want when they come to you to plan their estate?
That is a great question. And I think that that's such a personal desire that it does vary with different types of clients and different types of personalities. But I think what resonates with everybody when they're trying to figure out what to do with their money is they want to leave a legacy. They want to make an impact. They want it to be bigger than just themselves. And there's a lot of very technical strategies we can employ from a tax perspective and an investment perspective and a legal perspective. But I think the main goal is they want to impact their community and their family in a way that outlives them.
Okay, cool. Sounds kind of
yeah. What gets a donor thinking about giving in their estate plan?
Sometimes it's you guys, but in my experience as a fundraiser, it's usually when we talk about planned giving that we have a program. It's something people often say, oh yeah, we have had you in our will for the last 5 years, and you sort of feel a little bit flustered as a fundraiser, like, oh my gosh, are we ready for that? Do we have everything in place? And then for some professionals, they do have everything in place and they think, great, like, I can't wait to get you into our society or into our membership. But I think that's like the way we learn about it. But I think what actually is going on is that there's values alignment between the organization and the donors, like you said, like interest in their legacy. So I would say values alignment probably is the reason it happens.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so now we've had a kind of a nice question here, but now what I really want to know is, how do you get paid? Do you get commissions for selling certain things to people? Are you going to try to sell my donor stuff if I tell them about you? Or...
This is such a good question, and the answer is complex, and I'm biased, so I'm going to share my bias because I'm the one here. So this is an area within the financial advisor profession that is a little tricky because historically, advisors were stockbrokers and we made money by selling you stocks and being the go-between of, you wanted to buy Apple and I could sell it to you and I needed to make a commission on that. Thankfully, and with great effort, our profession has evolved a lot into advice giving. And so now it's less, I need to buy stock for you, and more, I need to advise you on how best to meet your goals, to take care of your family, to help with your tax strategies. It's evolved into something bigger and more complex. And for that, a lot of advisors have become fiduciaries and are fee only. So fee only is a buzzword in our industry, but it means we don't make any money off of selling anything. So no insurance policies, no investments, no third party. We take money directly from our clients for the advice that we give. So to us and to me personally, this is something I care about because it means there are no conflicts of interest. I don't have, any other motive than to just do what the best thing is for my client because they're the ones paying me for the advice that I give. So there are still a lot of financial planners who are great, who do wonderful work, and they just work at institutions that still pay by commission, and that's okay. But I think that as an industry, we're moving more toward this conflict-free, fee-only fiduciary type of advice. And I think that's a really good thing for the whole industry, for our clients, and for fundraisers as well.
I have always wondered that. Like, we have never talked about that. So that's super helpful.
No, that's it. Turning the tables, how do fundraisers get paid? I've always wanted to ask you, do you get paid based on the gifts that you close, or you contract with charities? How does that work for your world?
Yeah, so I just switched over into the consulting kind of space, which is very different, but still is the same in the answer about like if we get paid if we close gifts. And in all my years of fundraising, I've never been paid a penny more or less if you close or don't close gifts. You certainly get judged on your performance, especially if you're a major gift officer or plan giving officer, and that may come into like the review at the end of year, or if you are the department head, it's part of maybe the case you make for you and your team for special types of increases or benefits or time off, whatever the package looks like. But no, there's kind of a in my experience, again, there's so many different types of fundraisers doing so many different types of things. So I hope people will chat in any additional questions or even just different answers they'd give to this question, since we have the ability to have so many folks on the call. But never has there ever been any kind of tie to a gift. However, and that's typically been seen as like an ethical thing. I think the Association of Fundraising Professionals in their ethics statement kind of looks down upon it, but I also think there's this equity-minded approach to valuing time a little differently that's sort of happening in the fundraising community. So this finally the realization that everybody who's giving of their time is essentially putting forward a resource, and that resource should be compensated. So I wonder if some of that will shift with an equity lens, but the answer right now is no, that, in my experience. So
no, that's interesting.
I will tell you though, Ashley, that major gift officers and plan giving officers typically get paid the largest salaries because in an organization because of the type of dollars they bring in from plan giving and major giving.
Of course. There's a lot of similarities in our industry. If you are an advisor who works at a large firm, and you bring in a lot of clients, that also will demand a higher salary and profit sharing and things like that. So I feel like our industries are probably salaried and paid very similarly. You just entered the consulting world. We have a similar sort of, dichotomy of there are a lot of us who are independent, who are work with small firms, and it's a little bit more equitable. We all do a lot of work and we get paid for that work. And that's more my world as well. But yeah, it's a little bit all over the place depending on who you work with.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's bring it back to values then for our last questions. Just for you personally, you talked about your clients' values guiding their giving. What's your top personal value that guides you when you work with your clients?
Yeah. Oh, I thought a lot about this question, and I've got a few top personal values, but I think it comes down to similar to my clients. I want to, not just sit in my own little corner of the world and protect myself. I want to be vulnerable and open to the world and make an impact on my own community and my, raise my kids that way. So that we are always looking around to see where we can help. And I think that drives my decision to go into this type of profession. It's interesting work and I love it, but it also allows me to have, multiply that impact because I can try to guide others to do the same. And that's what they want. They just don't always know how. So I'd say, I don't know if it's a value per se, but just the idea of, be a good human in the world. And I think, don't just think about yourselves. And I think that's, that drives me personally. And then it drives a lot of work that I do with clients. What about you? What are your top values in your line of work?
Yeah, there's a few that guide me. I would say love and justice. And I kind of think they're maybe two sides of the same coin, to be honest. And you kind of have to do both working with donors, I believe, as movements like community-centric fundraising, which I don't think you and I have talked about, Ashley, but people on the call might be familiar with. As movements like that gain traction and prove that they're really useful and they work for fundraising, as well as being the right thing for communities, I think it's really my job as a fundraiser to help donors not only part with some of their resources and give generously, but also to think about why the problems they're giving to try to alleviate are there in the first place. And to start to imagine, what types of shifts and changes in society we need to have those things change, go away, be better, whatever the case may be for the mission organization. So I think it's a little bit of both. It's loving on your donors for giving generously and connecting to your mission, and also helping them in a still loving way, but in a way that definitely centers justice, to help folks see that that the things we're trying to fix in our nonprofit work are there for reasons that we need to get curious about.
Yeah, that's great. That's a tough job, to try to lovingly challenge people toward,
it can be,
toward change. Yeah.
And it's hard when, you have performance-based, like we were talking about, like performance-based connection to whether that donor gives or not. Like, you don't want to make somebody so mad that they don't want to give you that planned gift, or you don't want to accidentally, step into a conversation that you didn't mean to, because the donor's not ready for that conversation, and then you lose the gift. So that's the thing that I think a lot of fundraisers are facing right now, and perhaps same with planners. So doing a time check here. Again, I can't see the chat. I'm just going to pause for a second and see if there's anything that's come up that Allison feels like we should answer right now while I switch slides. And I'm not hearing anything.
Yeah, I don't think so. Sarah, I've got the chat up so I can see it while you've got your slides up.
Okay, great. So I think we'll just jump right into the kind of building blocks. I'll do this portion from a fundraising perspective, and then it'll lead kind of into Ashley, you sharing what are the key things that fundraisers and even donors might like to know kind of from your perspective. So
sure.
Give myself a little timer here and jump in. Again, questions welcome. So the very first thing that we promised when we sent out this description is just, what are the basic building blocks? If you're starting out thinking about planned giving, we know there's maybe a mix of folks today. There's people who are experienced with planned giving programs and want kind of some level up tips, which we'll try to throw in both Ashley and I for you, some things you can walk away with and use tomorrow or even later today if you're a go-getter. But if you're just starting out, we also want you to feel really comfortable with jumping into the planned giving space and jumping into those values-based conversations with your donors, because it is for everybody. It is not just for just a few nonprofits or just a few donors. It's not only for the ultra wealthy or the really big organizations, it's for all of us. So there's 3 key things that I would say you need. And the very first thing is that you need organizational buy-in to have a planned giving program. If you as the fundraiser on staff are the only one who wants a planned giving program, you've got a little bit of work to do to get to a place where you can launch one. Even though that work to launch it might not be super difficult work, it's just about having an executive director and a board and other key staff who can help you articulate your vision, which is number 2, for how the world will be different if you succeed. And it's really important to have clarity on that, because you're talking to people about what happens long after they're not here. Ashley, I think you mentioned for future generations. Like, this is about what happens in the far future and how what you're doing now impacts that. So you've really got to have that clear vision, and that's super tough to do if you're the only person who can talk about that future focused articulation of your mission and vision. Then the third thing, I just call it staying power. When I first got, I got some really excellent mentorship in planned giving, and I'll do a little case study for you and tell you about how I was able to build a planned giving program for an organization and where that's at now. But when I was first starting out, I got some really great mentorship from a number of different folks, and I'd be happy to provide that for anybody on the call too, kind of a give back. It helped me so much. And one of the things I heard from multiple people, but in different ways, was your donors have to know you're still going to be around when they're gone. And 1 or 2 of my mentors said, that might mean you need to be about a 10-year-old nonprofit or maybe a little more, kind of in terms of age of the nonprofit organization, but in my experience, it's really more about, do your donors believe your organization will be around? And that might not be about your age. That might be about the type of work you're doing, or how your work started, or how deeply rooted in community you are. So just think about what that looks like for your organization and see if you can say yes to that question. Those are the 3 basic foundational building blocks you need to build a plan giving program. And if you'd like an optional sort of extra credit item, not required in my opinion, but recommended, is to have something already going in your organization that creates a one-to-one relationship between your staff and your donors. So whether that's a major gift officer, or a mid-level gift officer, or a grassroots gift officer, or a annual fund expert who does some one-to-one relationships, something where you've got some ability to connect pretty personally and at a values level with your donors, that will just help you kind of get going. So then what does it take? What does it cost? That's one of the things I always like to think about, is like, okay, this is the thing we want to do. So what is it going to take? And as fundraisers, we're answering that question all the time. So I figured I'd answer it for you. It takes time, not a ton of time, but it takes time to think about those personal interests of the donor themselves. So you can do that in a lot of different ways. You can decide that that's a portion of a number of people's time. You can decide that it's a consultant's time. You can decide that you're going to use a third party like Stelter or something like that, but it takes some time. It takes a willingness to be curious and maybe a little bit uncomfortable, because you are going to be talking about legacy and values. I actually think that the talking about when people are no longer on the earth, when they die, is less uncomfortable sometimes than the talking about values. If you really get deep with somebody about values, it can be like really deep conversation. So just to kind of get folks' head around that a little bit, it's that curiosity is what will get you through that. Number 2, what it takes. And then number 3, you'll probably have to shift some previous practices. So I would recommend an integrated plan giving approach, which I'll talk about on the next, I think it's the next slide. And you have to do things like, mention plan giving in social media, on a social media calendar, or mention plan giving in other types of appeals. Nothing hugely different, but just some changes that would need to take place for you to have a successful program. Okay, and so just a little kind of case study with the last organization I worked full-time for, Beacon, where I was able to help create a plan giving program. This is just kind of digging deeply into one organization's experience, and then drawing a little bit from my experience in other organizations and as a consultant. So first thing that happened at Beacon when we decided we wanted to, we had those building blocks in place, and we're glad to share this slide deck later if you want those for later on. You want to have your org values and your donor values connect. And what we worked on at Beacon is really, as we articulated that clear vision, figuring out how to bring those 2 things together and make sure that they made sense and we could say them back to our donors. So once you have those 2 things, and this was the first bit of time we spent, was talking to donors who are likely to be our plan givers, like our board members, our committee members, and see if there was that alignment between organizational values and donor values. And once you have that, you've got your plan giving runway. It's literally the path that you follow to your plan giving program. Then we deployed some consent-based fundraising practices, which this is a whole nother webinar that's very interesting. There's lots of good folks out there doing this work. Veritus calls it permission-based asking. I call it consent-based fundraising. Seth Godin calls it permission-based marketing, but you ask for permission to ask. So you start practicing with your fundraising team. Beacon started deploying this in just regular fundraising, where you're saying, hey, Ashley, I know you really care about ABC because you and I talked about values last time we met. Can we talk a little bit about how you think about your money, like what it's going to do for you and your family and your community after you're not here anymore? Can we talk about that next time we meet? So just always getting that kind of permission ahead of time, that consent, to make sure this is a place the donor wants to go with you. And we practiced that at Beacon through all of our fundraising. And that made us really so much better at doing that when it's about end of life giving. And then the third thing, and this is a big one, is your metrics. So you want to measure, in my opinion, again, there's lots of ways to do planned giving. This is what has worked for Beacon and other organizations, is to measure the members and just gather the guesstimates. If you're just starting a planned giving program, it's more important to measure the members joining your program, your planned giving society, whatever you call it or name it, than it is to try to guess what the guesstimates are going to be for those donors themselves. Most donors will tell you, I don't know, it's a percentage of what's left, and they don't have a real good way to measure. And so one of my mentors, who's Marie Ruzek, you may know her, she always helped me understand this concept of guesstimate, which Google still thinks is a misspelled word because I don't think it's actually a real word, but it's so helpful, and it's the term donors understand. So and then gathering that information is really important, but it's not necessarily the metric you want to measure for your team. If you're the development director, say, you want to measure whether your fundraisers are able to bring 1 or 2 or 5 or 200 new members into your society and make that part of their performance-based reviews or increases each year. Otherwise, the major gifts bit, the part that they are measured on, the cash money that they bring in, is going to squeeze out whatever time they've got left for this planned giving program that can be worth, you guys know, millions and millions, maybe even billions of dollars across our sector. But it's not necessarily the most urgent thing. Donors aren't banging down our doors, typically. Some of you may be very lucky. But so making sure you're measuring those members is a really key, important part to weave into your staff's performance review. And then just quickly, these last couple things are just thinking about a communication plan to 3 special segments here. The prospective members, so those are those people who have, again, this is kind of plan giving best practices, which we're not going deeply into, but glad to do Q&A on. The prospective members are those people who've maybe given for a really long time, but they're maybe not giant donors. They're not the largest givers. Sometimes your plan givers will be your largest givers, but don't overlook folks who have given for a long time. Those are the folks who might have wealth to give after they've created their will and estate plan with a planned financial planner, perhaps. And then your all donor integration, how are you going to include plan giving mentions in your annual fund campaign, in your calendar year-end appeal, in your major donor solicitations, at your board meetings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how are you integrating for everybody? And then finally, what are you going to do for those members that join you? You're going to have a party, you're going to do a webinar for them to tell them a little bit more about what the society means. Just think about kind of what they might like and then create those communications plans. And then finally, and this is kind of where Beacon's at today, is create data practices that help you do the metrics piece and eventually start tallying those guesstimates so you can actually think about how much money your plan giving program is worth in your operating budget and in your long-term planning. So that's the little mini quick case study for Beacon. And I guess just as we transition to Ashley, I'm just curious, Ashley, did you notice anything that didn't show up on this list? It's okay if you didn't.
No, you tell me.
All right. Well, what's not on the list is that nobody has to be an expert on all the different plan giving vehicles. And yes, it's good to know that because we have now a little bit more trust in our financial planner friends. So I'm hoping maybe you can tell us a little more about what's on donors' minds.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I jump into this, I want to give one little maybe a note of encouragement or a way to think about donors in the sense of, I work with clients, donors, your donors on all spectrums of wealth. So I work with clients who we wouldn't consider, mega wealthy, and I work with mega wealthy. And that doesn't really mean very much for a charitable inclination. Some of my clients who we wouldn't consider ultra wealthy are the most charitable people I've ever met. They'll give away as a percentage more of their wealth than some of my ultra wealthy clients will. And the vehicles that I will tell you about today work across the spectrum, and they actually work really well for kind of the mass affluent, if you will. So that's a buzzword we use, but it's just, an average amount of wealth, people who have saved enough to live and retire comfortably, but who also will probably have enough at the end of their lives that they want to see the impact now. They want to give now. And a lot of these vehicles that we use are lifetime vehicles, easy to implement, not complex. Anybody can understand them and ask about them and get these gifts done across whatever wealth spectrum there is. The other thing I will say, and this is always fascinating to me, is our perception of who is wealthy. I'm guessing that as a fundraiser, you don't always know, well, how much money do you have? I know how much money my clients have. I have to know. But I will tell you, wealth whispers, and you may not always know that the person in front of you is got a lot of money and are ready to give it away. So that would be my bit of encouragement, is just remember true wealth whispers, in that they're not maybe going to pull up in a BMW, and they're not going to have a giant house, and they're not going to have sort of the things that you would associate with wealth necessarily. They're going to have a lot of money invested and a lot of money in the bank, and you'll never see that. And so keep in mind, anybody in front of you, you don't always know, and these vehicles will help you start to get at that information as you start to ask about some of these strategies. So what is on the donor's mind? This is, again, across the entire wealth spectrum. Everybody's nervous about the stock market right now. That seems to be always the case. We're all a little nervous about what's going on politically, whatever side you sit on. We're all a little nervous about, the investments we have. Are we going to have enough? What happens in a correction, a recession? Am I safe? It's a lot of those sort of emotional questions when we start to look at, what's going on right now. I'm not going to get into a market prediction, because that's not what I do. Markets go up and down, and they just do. And nobody can tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm convinced of that. But everybody, we remain a little nervous about it. Something right now that's very true is everybody's nervous about tax increases. Again, whatever side of the aisle you sit on, you're a little bit nervous about paying more in tax. There's a lot of things that are being proposed right now that would affect more the ultra wealthy segment, but they're nervous about it. Nobody wants to pay, more than they have to, and so that's something that it's on everyone's mind. It's on our minds a lot. How do we help clients maximize their wealth? Pay taxes. I'm no financial planner is against taxes. We just want to do it in a way that preserves the most amount of money for our family and for charity. And then the thing that a lot of people are dealing with is just the rising cost of healthcare, but particularly long-term care. We've got a lot of clients who are facing some long-term care needs. It's very expensive. That's one of the things that will often, at the end of someone's life, will really take a lot of their wealth if we don't plan for it. So that's something that's on their minds quite a bit. And then the next slide is an article that I saw recently, and I think it's true. A lot of people are worried about leaving too much money to their kids. Nobody wants to just hand over millions of dollars to their kids, because we know that sudden wealth can sometimes have a really negative impact on behavior. Not always, but I think everybody has this idea that it's good to work for the things. It's good to earn, it's good to work. Or at least that's what a lot of my clients who are within this sort of millionaire, if you will, feel. They want their kids to be generous and to have a good work ethic and to use money wisely. So they don't want to just die and have millions of dollars just land in some of their kids' bank accounts. So with all of that said, here are some strategies that the planner uses. There's more than just this list. It's not exhaustive, and I won't go into too much technical detail on them. But here are some of the common things that we talk about with clients, and the way that we like to advise people give now while they're living. One of the easiest things to do, and you all know this as fundraisers, but we advise our clients to gift away assets, investments that they have appreciated in growth, and otherwise they would pay tax if they sold those. So again, you may all know this, but high level, if I buy one share of Apple for $100 and it grows to $200 and I sell it, I owe tax on that $100 of growth. If I give that share away to a charity, nobody pays that tax. I don't pay it. The charity doesn't pay it. I get to get out of that capital gains tax problem is kind of how we frame it with clients. So it's easy to do. Every company, whether you're with Fidelity or Charles Schwab or any broker, this is a common daily occurrence. It's a really easy thing for clients to wrap their heads around, and it's something that advisors are using a lot. In conjunction with that, we are using donor advised funds more than ever. These have always been around, but with some of the tax law changes a few years ago, itemized deductions, which is where you can write off charitable gifts, kind of went away. A lot of people, because of the tax law changes, don't itemize anymore. So they are taking standard deductions. They're not writing off as much in charity every year. Maybe they're giving less. So enter the donor advised fund, and it's a vehicle where we can open an account. We can have clients gift appreciated assets, again, going back to number one, into this type of account. And we can do it in a way that times their charitable gifts more tax efficiently. So again, I'm not going to get into the weeds on that, but donor advised funds have become much more popular in the last few years, and every advisor can help a client open one. They can advise which assets to give. They can help them make the gifts. It's a very easy thing for advisors to do, and clients can ask their advisors about it. The other really powerful one that I've been using in the last few years is this idea of a qualified charitable distribution. So if clients come to me and they have a lot of money saved in IRA accounts, so 401ks, IRAs, think, when you take the money out, when you need it in retirement, you pay the tax on it. So you save the money while you're working. It's all tax deferred, but as you need it, you pay the tax later. The idea is at some point, and this has changed as well in the last couple of years, when you reach age 72, the government requires that you start taking money out of that account. They want the tax dollars. So you have to take out a certain amount, regardless of if you need it. And a lot of my clients don't need it. It's not money that they need to spend. It just adds onto their tax bill, quite frankly. So what you can do is you can take that amount that you have to take out, and you can gift it to charity directly, and you don't pay the tax on it. And so a lot of people are using this bucket of assets they have as their charitable giving vehicle. It's a huge tax benefit to the client, and it's also a huge benefit to the charity. It's the same amount of money that they would give otherwise. They can just give it right out of this type of account. And if you have donors, if you can kind of get to, how big is that account that you have, you can kind of back into, they might have $100,000 of required distribution that they have to take. And that's $100,000 of income that's going to be taxed at higher rates. So you can help guide them to ask their advisor, hey, what would be the impact if I did something like this? How much tax would I save? And this is a question I answer with every client. It's easy to answer. It's easy to show a client the impact of a gift like that. It's also very, very easy to do. It's like one piece of paperwork for clients to do this type of gift. So these top three are my go-to strategies because I can get them done in a day. Clients understand them, and they're easy to show the benefit and the value to the clients from a tax perspective. So if you were to bring these up with your donors in a way you feel comfortable with, these are things they could go back to their advisor and ask about. The last two add a little bit of complexity. You can't get them done in a day, and it's a little bit, sometimes clients don't want the hassle. A charitable lead trust or a charitable remainder trust, again, not going to go into a ton of detail, but it's a way to save on an estate and income tax side of the equation while being charitably inclined. So it's a way to either give money to charity up front and receive some income while you're living, or vice versa, charity receives some income while you're living, and then the rest of it goes to beneficiaries. So just two strategies that aren't as easy to implement. It does require some legal documents. You have to set up a trust. There's some administration, some cost to it. So that's why we don't always go directly to that strategy. It has to make more sense for a certain client. And then incorporating it into an estate plan is kind of that next level of, you can get very complex with that. It can also be very simple where you just name a charity, but that's more, end of life impact after you're gone type of planning. And I'm happy if you have questions or you have a particular person you're working with and you want to run something by me, my email's at the end. I'm more than happy to kind of give you my 2 cents on strategy. So, or if you have more questions about any of these, I'm happy to talk more about that too. So all of those strategies kind of dovetails into, these are the exact questions you can almost sort of feed your donors to go ask their financial planners. I'll be honest, financial planners don't do a great job with charity. We ask, we'll ask clients, oh, are you charitably inclined? I mean, that's very dry. We're not, a lot of planners don't go there with their clients. And so if a client says, oh, not really, what does that mean? We just say, okay, moving on. And so it's helpful if clients come to us and say, I would like to give a gift to this particular charity. I've been really impacted by this organization, or they've had somebody in their family, or, we all have things that we care about. And so financial planners don't do a great job of asking, well, what do you care about? We should, and sometimes we do, but it's more often the client's coming to us. And so if a client were to go to their financial planner, if one of my clients came to me and said, how much can I give every year and still, meet my goals and not run out of money? I would be able to run a financial planning projection for them that would show them the impact of that over, their lifetimes. And I would be able to give them a budget and say, based on your wealth and what you need to spend and your medical costs and everything else, I think you can give $10,000 a year or 20 or 100. And the clients, I've been able to do that with clients. And it's the best part of this job, is to be able to see a client realize that they can make such a big impact. Most people don't know. They just don't know how much they can give. They haven't, put it in with the rest of the pieces of their plan. So financial planners are able to do that. And if the financial planner can't do that, it may be time for a different financial planner, because it is something that we do all the time and we love to do. And then again, dovetailing on that, what's the best way for me to give to charity every year? I just talked about the strategies. Usually 1 or 2 of those works, and the financial planner will be able to analyze that and give that client an answer and say, I think you should, if you want to give $10,000 this year, let's do a donor advised fund, or let's do a qualified charitable distribution. It's very easy for us to give advice on how to do it. Donor advised funds we can open. QCDs, the qualified charitable distributions, we can do those. One thing that we talk a lot about is how to incorporate the next generation. How do we get our family involved? Donor advised funds are great for that, because you can also have your kids be donors with you, and you can start to allow your children and people in your family who will ultimately control those assets to see what you care about and to watch you give and how much and what does that look like and what's the impact. And your kids can take over that donor advised fund and they become the donors. And so it's a really great way to start that conversation with the next generation as well. Financial planners are, again, some do a really great job, having those family type of meetings. This is the legacy part of what we do is, let's talk to your kids about your goals and who you want to impact and how and why. And, some families don't talk about money at all. We're kind of raised not to, right? It's kind of a taboo thing to talk about at the dinner table. So that's where a financial planner can come in as sort of an objective voice in that conversation and start to ask some of those questions, that Sarah talked about. The questions of, what made you come to that decision, or why do you care about that particular thing? And as fundraisers, telling your donors to go to their financial planners and ask these questions really kicks us into gear if we don't know that our clients are charitably inclined. We don't always know. And so these questions, I think, will help start that conversation for any financial planner that they work with.
Cool. Thanks, Ashley. There's already a question from Ashley Johnson in the chat. Do you see that one?
I do. So I can read it and then
I'll
answer.
stop sharing here. I'll go back to the share for our final slide.
Sure. Okay, the question is, do you give referrals to community foundations to establish donor advised funds, or do you profit from establishing them with your firm? That's a really good question. No, I don't profit from having the donor advised fund with my firm. It's technically, it's not money that we manage or charge on. Usually if one of my clients starts a donor advised fund, I help them set it up. I guess to give it away, I typically use like something like Fidelity or Charles Schwab, a big name that offers inexpensive options for donor advised funds. And I just help them open it and they gift it. I help them manage it, and we don't charge on it. Philosophically, that's me. I just think I want the most, impact for charity. So I'm not gonna charge people to do that kind of work. It's part of the full service. So my clients pay me for everything. And I just consider that, if you want to do that strategy, I'm going to do it. And it's not going to be an additional bill or anything like that. Some advisors will charge on them if you have a very large donor advised fund. So if somebody gifts, let's say more than 250,000, sometimes advisors will say, well, that's a significant investment in my time to manage that. So I will charge a fee on it, which is fair. So you just have to ask the planner, what are the fees associated with opening those?
And I'm going to perceive a little bit even behind Ashley's question to you, Ashley Reiter, because I'm wondering if part of that question is about the mention of community foundations. One of the tensions in the fundraising community, I even felt it as you were talking, and you and I have never talked about this, so everybody's going to get the real answers here.
Oh yeah.
Although they've been getting them all along, this is extra real. Yep. Deaths can be kind of a double-edged sword. I think you even use that word for nonprofits too, because that money doesn't flow into community. Yep. And it gets set aside and it's essentially transferred wealth, right? Generation to generation. Like you said, it can be a great way to teach future generations about giving, and there's some positives to that. But community foundations usually have, Ashley can feel free to jump in or chat or ask to be unmuted. To correct me if I'm wrong on this, but community foundations generally have a higher threshold for the requirement of distribution back into the community. So you can hang on to less of your money in a donor fund. And essentially, I believe that, if a donor gave the same money they'd put into a DAF to a 501c3 nonprofit organization, they receive the same tax benefit, but they don't have as much money to give out over time. So it's like a question of giving while you're living or not. So I don't know if you have any, that's not really a question, just no,
I think that's a really interesting observation. And I would agree with you 100%. I think donor advised funds are probably better for the client than they are for charitable organizations, because the money doesn't go out right away and it can go anywhere. And the way that the advisor talks about donor advised funds is really like 99.9% the tax benefit. So it's very, again, it's kind of this fine line we walk with clients, because we're the objective voice in the room. We have no, skin in the game for any particular charitable organization. We just can't. So all we can do is say, well, here's the best vehicle that'll benefit you the most. And that's really the conversation. So if a client came to me and said, I have a community foundation that I want to give to, here's how it works, I would do the exact same, process. Okay, let's do that. Let's figure out what we need. Is there someone there you'd like me to call and talk with and figure out the best way to do this? Like, absolutely friend in that scenario, but probably very unintentional foe. So it's more that idea of, if a client comes to me, I'm like, there's no, I'm completely objective in that situation. And so it's, donor advised funds are there and they're easy for us to do. But if a client knew of a community foundation and came to me with it, absolutely would do that process and not question it. So maybe that's another area where you can encourage your donors to say, you need to tell your financial planner this. This isn't an area that we're very good at, to know or to ask. Well, is there a community foundation? That's just not a question most planners know to ask, quite honestly.
Right. And there's another chat. I think everyone can see this one from Aileen Sussman. Hi, Sarah. I'm head of a community foundation, a CF, and I think it's a myth that DAFs at CFs just sit there and are not distributed. Each community foundation has different distribution rates, as does each donor base. I think based on how they, as does each donor based on how they use their DAF. And DAFs sometimes are not the only annual source of funds that a donor may use to give a nonprofit. Yeah, thank you for that.
No, that's great. Yeah.
That's
good to know. And I think the way that we use DAFs, and maybe it's, I can substitute community foundations, and it's just in my community, most of us don't know enough about them. DAFs, for what it's worth, allows us to get a big tax write-off for clients in 1 year, so that we can bunch charitable giving. And it's like, literally, that's the singular focus for planners, is really like, what's the tax impact?
If I'm thinking about the community foundations locally that, that I'm aware of, they offer DAFs. I mean, it's just like a different sort of values alignment, I think, back to our values conversation. And Aileen or others can chat in with clarity.
Well, and I think that's an interesting thing then, because if you have knowledge of this space, get in front of financial planners in your area, in your community. I mean, there's tons of us. A lot of us are like me. We're independent. We work at smaller firms. We are, honestly, maybe I'm biased. I think we're a pretty collaborative group. Some advisors are a little bit like sort of the friend or foe conversation. Some advisors are a little standoffish, but most of us want to just do what's best for our clients and the community. So if you've got something you want to talk to financial planners about, so that we understand it more, or so that we can bring it up with our clients, I love those emails and phone calls of, hey, can I have 15 minutes of your time to share this with you? And whether or not it's something that I can use today or a year from now, most of us really welcome that type of education. We're very curious about the vehicles available to our clients. So reach out. Yeah, cool. Don't hesitate to do that.
That's great. I don't see other questions at the moment, and we're just at the end of our time here.
We do have one question.
Oh, great. Go for it.
Okay. So this is, the question is it helpful to financial advisors to have a legal profile for a charity when processing a qualified charitable distribution, et cetera, to a charity? The profile would include the tax ID, legal name, address, et cetera.
Enthusiastically, yes. That is always information that we are searching for. We will call the charity and ask, but if it's something that comes to us at the time that the donor wants to give the gift, it does make it a lot faster and a lot easier for us. And, as part of our fiduciary responsibility, we will, if it's a well-known charity, or if it's a charity that, we'll look it up, we'll make sure, we'll kind of do a little bit of due diligence that, hey, this is a legitimate thing, because we have to protect our clients above all other things. So if you can provide that kind of information at that time, it's very helpful to us. That's a really good question.
Cool. Well, let us know if any others come in, Allison. I want to ask a follow-up just to what you were saying, Ashley. Again, just trying to perceive maybe what folks might be thinking out there. When you mentioned, Ashley, that we could get in front of financial advisors and that might be something that they'd be open to, I wonder can you help us with like a question? Like, can you put a question in our mouths about how to have your donor talk with your financial advisor, maybe about like what kind of DAFs they would recommend, or if they're aware of community foundations or something like that? Any thoughts on guidance for us?
Yeah, so your question is, what can fundraisers go and ask of financial advisors, or what they can tell their donors to ask?
Yeah, so if my donor is working with you and they mention they have a financial planner, what could I mention to sort of get them thinking about community foundations, or get them thinking about how to get their money into community, in a way that's more direct, or as direct as is possible for that person, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I think mostly you can tell your donor, you need to make your financial planner aware of this value that you have, of this goal that you have, because otherwise we won't know to steer them in that direction.
Okay.
If you can tell your donor, go to your financial planner and say, you know, I would rather donate to a community foundation geared toward this or this particular one. Give some direction there, and that really helps us say, well, okay, I can help research that.
So
But without knowing, yeah, specificity is a big deal because there are so many options. And unless you know kind of what your client is after, we wouldn't always know to provide that kind of option, especially if it's a particular community foundation, because we have to remain sort of objective. We can't always recommend, you know, oh, this one, because that would be seen as a little bit of a conflict of interest. But if a client comes and says, this is what I want, it's my job to find it and to vet it and to help them make that possibility. So if I know that, then we're all on board.
So back to values.
Yeah, it's all about the values.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Allison, if there's no more questions, I think that is our program. I'll put our slide up. We'd love to have folks stay in touch if they want to, and our emails are here. And thank you all for listening. Did you want to say anything to end us out, Ashley?
No, like I said, feel free to email. I'm an open book. If you have questions or are dealing with something that you want to strategize and kind of talk through those things, I love that. I'm here for however I can be helpful.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley and Sarah, for sharing your insights. And thank you to all the participants today for your questions and comments. I would say check out the chat box again and click on the mentorship program that they had mentioned in there. Following the webinar, the browser will take you to an evaluation. Please take a few minutes to provide some feedback so that we can continue to improve our educational offerings. Any resources referenced today in today's webinar will also be shared in a follow-up communication along with the evaluation. So watch for that to hit your inbox about tomorrow this time. The recording will be made available next week on the Leave a Legacy Minnesota site. And don't forget to head to your favorite podcast platform and listen to all the episodes of the Legacy of Generosity podcast hosted by our own Leave a Legacy Minnesota committee members. These programs are made available free to members and the general public by the generous support of our funders and members. If you're interested in becoming a member of the Minnesota Gift Planning Association and supporting a stronger Minnesota nonprofits through plan giving, you can join today at mngpa.org. Again, thank you for taking the time to participate in today's discussion and have a great rest of your day. This concludes the session.